Just happy to be here.
Yep. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Get Your Fill Financial Independence and Long Life, where we explore ways to achieve those two goals. I'm your host, Chris McCarran, and I am so excited that John Bianchi is here today because he's not just the Airbnb guy, he's the Airbnb data guy. So he's going to help us to figure out not just not how to do Airbnb, because any fool can put a couple pictures and a description on the thing, but what should we do it? How's it work? Okay. So John, thanks so much for being with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So how did you, so I feel like now most people kind of know about Airbnb, but when I first learned about it, it was from a friend actually in the UK. So I was kind of surprised that it actually started here.
Yeah. Oh, yeah,
But
yeah.
it wasn't a thing, right? It was young people like backpackers. How did you first find out about
Yeah, honestly, I don't even recall how I first came across it, but there was a situation where I was living with I had an apartment with my brother, and my brother moved out, so I had this extra room, and I had heard about this Airbnb thing, and I was like, I'm just gonna give it a shot. You know what I mean? And like, so, I remember just it being like a total test trial thing. I downloaded the app and took pictures of the spare room. Like, this is when, I was okay with living with random people. You know what I mean? Like
it?
I was like in that kind of an experiment,
Yep.
and so I put the room onto Airbnb, and then I actually did it so wrong, like I uploaded it so improperly that I ended up living with my parents for 2 weeks when I first got started because
You gave
I
them the
didn't want
whole
to get a
house.
yeah, I didn't want, yeah, I literally just gave out the entire house, gave my room. Like, I'm like, I don't know what I was thinking when I originally did it, but I didn't want to get a bad review, right? So I was like,
Right.
well, I guess I can just have it. And so, but then like, time kind of went on, and I learned more about how to do it and like figured it out. And really, like, the cool thing for me was that my rent was only like $700 a month. And I was making, like, during the summer months, like somewhere between 12 and $1,500 a month, which isn't like crazy money, but when you're not paying your rent and you have like extra cash coming in,
Exactly.
good to go. You know what I mean? I was
Exactly.
super happy about it. Yeah, and
Yeah.
the guests too were, you get some fun guests that would come through, so it was
Yeah.
always a good time with them.
But yeah, if you're going to do that, if you're going to share your living space, you definitely have to be of a certain mindset.
Oh yeah, I would not do it again. I'm not trying to do it anymore.
But you might want to do it again when you're like retired. You know what I mean? Where
May-
you're like, oh, let's have some random people through the house because I'm kind of bored and whatever.
Yeah, maybe. Who knows? It's always interesting. I always got like, yeah, I was never really bothered or upset by anybody that ever came in. And like, sometimes I'd get like four people that would come in, and they would all be from, like, I think there were some people from Spain, and they were just all like drinking, have a good night and playing cards. And like, I was there hanging out with them. Like, so yeah, you never know. It creates good stories.
Cool. So how did
Yeah.
you go from doing, like renting your bedroom, your spare bedroom, to getting into being the data guy?
So I'll try and give a sort of quick version of this, but I was an investor before this, and when you're an investor, you do a ton of research, right? And so I was,
If you're a good investor, you do a ton of research.
if you're, yeah, I guess so. I
You're
don't
going
know
to
if
be a
that's considered
successful investor.
yeah, successful investor, but and so I knew I didn't like the investing world, like the entire, like, day to day, the business, everything around it, and so I was looking for something different. And I was testing out this Airbnb thing, and then I just started reading articles about like what else is possible with this. And then I realized that people had like full out businesses running Airbnbs and had tons of properties, and they were just like, if you're making some cash flow with one, like, what if you had 50, right? You know what I mean? And so I learned more and more, and then I actually, what really sparked it for me was I came across this site called AirDNA, and AirDNA has all the data in the world about every single Airbnb that exists. They track how much they're making and all this different stuff. And I realized like how much money these people are making, right? It's almost like if you knew how much every McDonald's was making, you might want to run a McDonald's. You know what I mean? If
Right.
there was just like open information about that, right? And so I think it was kind of like that really sparked it for me. And then I opened up a couple of homes in Michigan, and then I raised some money, quit my other business, which was investing, and moved to Chicago and opened up, in total it got to about 15 locations, and I had two down in Scottsdale, and like the other 13 in Chicago, and I closed the ones in Michigan. But yeah, so like I had I also had a cleaning business, and I was doing a couple of different models, and like it was the systems were in place, everything was running well. And then what happened was, 2020 came along and completely wiped away everything. But I feel like I was really fortunate because as 2020 happened, I had somebody who wanted to buy my business and buy all my contracts and buy everything. And I was like, well, there's no cash flow coming in. I don't know really what's going on. And like, I'm like, why not? You know what I mean? Like, I'm gonna try something else. And so, anyways, I sold off all of my homes, sold off all my contracts. And during that time period of like building up my business and finding all these homes, one thing I did really, really well was understand the data and understand where the most profit was in all of Chicago, what type of homes, what the home needed to look like, and I figured out I had this like system that I would use to sort through the data and make sense of it, right? And so what I did was I actually just created a course where I taught people how to do this, but I had no idea how to sell it. And I was like, well, I don't want it to go to waste. So I just threw it onto YouTube. Right. And it's got around like 7,000 to 8,000 views so far. Right.
That's good.
And yeah, and through that though, it turned into an Airbnb data consulting business. So like so many people have reached out to me and so many people have worked with me that I have like a system and a business behind helping people understand the data. Because if you don't understand the Airbnb data, you're going to be shooting yourself in the foot before you even get started, right? But anyways, that's the short story of how I went from renting out a spare room to being the Airbnb data guy.
Cool.
Yeah.
So let's talk just a little bit of background for people who might have never put a property on Airbnb and stuff like that. Like what kinds of data is important? What kind of things are you really need to focus in on in order to make sure that it isn't better just to, rent long term or, take some other option?
Yeah. So that's a really good question that has a ton of answers, right? And the reason being is because there's a lot of different factors that come into play that will determine like if the place is profitable or not. And generally, like you can't just assume this sort of like blanket assumptions don't work because it's different in every single city and every single different location. So like some really easy examples from my own experience that I talk about quite a bit is that a 4-bedroom in the certain spot of Chicago, right? So Lincoln Park, Chicago, this one neighborhood, a 4-bedroom was very profitable, right? And most of the reason is because there aren't any 5 bedrooms, and so it's like the largest home you can get in Chicago, and it did really well. 3 bedrooms would not cash flow at all. In the exact same location, did not cash flow at all, and like the rent was very close, right? So you'd pay like $3,000 for a 3-bedroom, but $3,500 for a 4-bedroom. But the 4-bedroom could make up to 100,000, and the 3-bedroom could only make about 60,000, right? And so there's, when you ask that question of like, what should you be looking for in general to be a good property, it's a kind of a loaded question.
Yeah.
I will try and give some general ideas here. So the first one is that the larger the property, the better, right? Because that's where you're not really competing with
Like hotels and
hotels
stuff like that.
hotels at
Yeah.
all, right? You're not
Yeah.
competing with hotels at all. And they can split the bill, so you can do these larger amounts, and generally like a lot of the data companies say it as well. The larger the property, the better off that you're going to be able to do. If you're in vacation areas, right, like vacation towns, you want to kind of find a spot where the real estate hasn't gone through the roof if you're going to be purchasing. But there's still a good amount of demand coming to the area that's going to allow for you to actually cash flow off of that property, right? That's where you find a ton of opportunity. It's where you get into like the cities where it becomes really complicated, because honestly, I remember there was one side of the street would make like $20,000 less than the other side of the street. And it was like, and it's what I call, yeah, land borders. There's probably a street that you know of. I know there's one in my hometown where on one side of the street you wanted to grow up on, the other side of the street you didn't want to grow up on. You know what I mean? And then, like that's all it was, right? And but anyway, so yeah, like the cities get a lot more complicated, and that's why I have a business helping people with the data. But as a general rule, like the bigger the property, the better, and always just try to pay the minimal amount that you possibly can, while ensuring that there is still good demand. And then if views are going to increase the amount of money that you're going to make, the better the views, the more money you're going to make. The closer you are to water, the more money you're going to make. We're talking about vacations here, right? Like people
Right.
pay for these things, and so that's kind of the stuff you want to focus on.
Yeah,
Yeah.
makes sense. Does it
Mhm.
also depend on your particular ability to be involved. So obviously if I have to pay a property manager and a cleaner and all that kind of stuff
Oh
versus
yeah.
if it's next door and I'm going to be able to do that stuff myself.
Yes, big time. Right. So one issue that I see a lot of people making is that they just buy a prop, like they want to get into Airbnb for the passive cash flow. And so what they do is they just, do some research, buy a property, get somebody else to manage it, somebody else to clean it, and they never touch it. And those people almost never cash flow. Right. They own the property. Sometimes like their bills are being paid, but they're not really making anything else. And sometimes they have to like pay the extra, but they're the ones in my mind that actually lose out the most when they try and get into this.
Yeah.
Now that's not to say that there's not good and great property managers out there, or if you just set everything up like really, really well and then hand it off to somebody to just like take care of the guests, you can definitely do that as well. And like it would be profitable. It's just really, really risky to buy a property, assuming that it's just going to make crazy amounts more and have the property manager, because property managers, there's tons of them and like there's so many of them, and so many of them are really bad at Airbnb. Like they're so bad at the marketing side, so bad at like the pricing, the ranking. They just all they know to do is like take care of the home, as in a sense of like if a doorknob breaks, like they're really
Right.
great at that.
Right.
And some aren't even great at that, but like yeah, so I don't know. I always tell people like that's a really scary dream of just like doing it. But if you do the legwork at the beginning, you understand it yourself, you really get good at it, you can just sort of bring someone on to take care of it, which is what I ended up doing, right? I got my properties up and running and I paid somebody to run them all
But
with my
did they
oversight.
run them including the Airbnb side of it? Meaning,
Yes,
they're responding to the guests and stuff.
yes. Yes, but it took a ton of training, right?
Yeah, because
Ton
that's
of
where I've
training.
never been comfortable letting go. Like, yes, you can clean it, you can fix everything, you can, something happens, but
Right.
I feel like I've always had to be the one communicating with the guests because even I sold my property, and because there's still people there under my name, I'm still communicating with them because I feel like that's where you get your super hosts. That's where you get your,
Yes. So like that's so to me, I had to let go. It took me a while. Like I had to let go because I wanted to keep expanding, and I had so many, I it was a scale thing. You know what I mean? It was like I have to get somebody else to take this over at some point.
yeah,
Where if you have just one property and you want to be on top of it, staying in communication with the guests is like number one, right? That's probably the last thing you get rid of.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm all about now. It's so great now that Airbnb allows you to schedule the messages. I used to be
Yeah.
like, oh, now I got to send them a thing like, oh, you're going to check in tomorrow. Here's all your info. But now it's like,
Yeah.
oh, this goes out 2 days before and this goes out, 7 o'clock the day they check in and all that stuff. So that
It's,
really cuts down a lot.
there's been softwares that have actually done that for like since 2017, since I think they've even been around since like way earlier than that, but they did so it took Airbnb forever to implement that into their platform, but like you could pay like $10-20 a month and they would automate your messages and do a ton of other things too. But that was I remember when I first implemented that, like how much easier it was to communicate with the guests, because you're sending the same thing over and over, right? It kind of
Exactly.
gets tedious.
Yeah.
But yeah.
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 Well, so I'm curious because I know there's certain markets where people think, oh, like if I go buy a big house in Nashville, I'm just going to make a ton of money, right? And well, first of all, let's talk about how people first find you and like how you open up the world for them so they all of a sudden have.
Yeah. So YouTube is where I have everything. I find YouTube is like without a doubt the best place for my type of content, because it's confusing. Data is confusing, and I try to make it as simple as possible, right? And so I have two different courses on YouTube that explain data. One's like very entry level, helping you like break down a market, very manual. The other one's more advanced, and you have to actually work with me for it to be useful for you. And then I just have like other videos out there that just talk about data in general. And so like that's where if you're trying to understand data, you type in Airbnb data or AirDNA into YouTube. There's going to be my videos.
No, you
Yeah.
just went quiet for a second. Sorry. I thought it was, but
Oh.
then you came back. So that's good.
Oh, okay, perfect. Good,
Sorry
good.
about that.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, so if you want to find me, that's like where YouTube is where I have all of my stuff that will help break it down. And so that's my strongest recommendation, to start there.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
and when people come to you now, are they saying like, I want to invest in the United States anywhere, or are they saying this is where I am and can you help me figure out what the best property is?
Combination of those things, right? So usually, like I would say the majority of the time what happens is that somebody has an idea of where they want to go, right? So they're like, hey, I want to make Dallas work, or like I want to open up some properties in Dallas, or I want to open up some properties in Tampa, like whatever it may be.
Yeah.
And they're coming to me saying like, can you help me? Can you because I build reports for people, right? So they're like, can you build a report for Dallas? So that I can understand Dallas and all the information on it. And like, obviously, yes, that's what I do, right? So I help them understand that.
Yeah.
And then honestly, it's almost always the last question, especially for people who already know where they want to go. They're like, where is the best place to go in the entire country, right? Like I always get it. Every single person asks the same question.
But
Like,
not at first, the way they should.
not
right?
at first. No, yeah, because and it's smart not to ask it at first, right? Because most people, especially when you're first starting to get into this, like, you really, like, I strongly recommend, if you can do it where you live, it's 100% going to be the easiest way to do it. But if you can't, like I live in a place where I can't, you just can't do it here. Go somewhere where it's like 2 to 5 hours away max, right?
Yeah.
And like do it within that range. But then if you really can't do it there, then go somewhere else. So they're usually starting off with like where they're close to, and they're asking me about that. And then they're like, what if I were to do it somewhere else, right? And so I kind of have like a staple question answer for that one, that I like blanket advice that I give to everybody, which is that, first off, hotels are absolutely everywhere, right? So if hotels are everywhere, then there's money to be made almost everywhere when it comes to short-term rentals, because
Right.
people need the hospitality, right? But then, so like, you got to keep that in mind. And if you can't do it where you're located, go where you want to go. Like, there's nothing better than owning an Airbnb where you actually want to travel. I had a couple places down in Scottsdale, and like, it was amazing. Like, I got to go there every once in a while, and I just absolutely loved everything about that. Sedona was like 2 hours away. Got to go there a couple times, right? And it makes you want to be there more, right? It makes you want to take better care of the property. You never want to go somewhere where it's just like, the profit is, maybe the profit's a little bit better, but you never want to be there, right? It just kind of contradicts your drive to go there. But the third one obviously is like, if you really, really don't care about the place or the location, then just, they try and go to the outskirts of really popular places, because that's where you're going to find that the real estate's good and there's still good demand. So that's a really long answer to that question, but yeah.
No,
That's
it's good. But it's funny because you just reminded me, not totally off topic, but it's interesting. I was talking to a friend of mine who lives near Orlando. And she's like, I couldn't do Airbnb around here because everybody does it. But I would think that in an area like that there would be a demand for like executive rentals, like a place where that's not for kids. You're going to be there for work and you want to be, that it's just like a totally different feeling, like more of like a higher
Yeah.
level. Does something like that make sense? Like a different
Yep, I know.
mindset around the same. Do you know
Same
what I'm trying to
concept.
say?
I know exactly what you're saying. Yeah. So that's the not necessarily the newer version that like the gurus are pushing, but yeah, I mean, like that model, the executive stay, it's called like corporate rentals, is generally like
Yep.
the term for it, right? Like the 30-day stays type of people. So that is something that is being pushed more often now by the viral YouTube people who teach about Airbnb. Is about getting into an apartment building, getting 10 units in that apartment building, and renting them out somewhere between like a week to 3 months, or sorry, a week to 30 days, and making them more corporate, more high end, more for those types of people, right? And so like that model definitely works in a ton of places, obviously metropolitan areas, right? I haven't done it myself. I've looked into it. I've actually tried doing it in Chicago when I was there, but they just like, I couldn't get into any of the buildings. And so it definitely works, but you just have to go that model, right? It's like any business. You kind of have to choose who is your customer archetype, and then where are they, and then supply exactly what you want to supply to them, right? So that's that should answer that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's interesting because I just kind of did that like instinctively because I thought when I go to Orlando, I would love to be in a place where there's no flipping kids, Nobody's peeing in the pool here, right? Okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, right. Yeah, but the whole thing about Orlando is Disney, right? So like the vast majority of the people, like probably 80 to 95% of the people going are going to be families and kids. And so it's the easy one to target, but it can be oversaturated, right? So like you can kind of carve off your own little niche by doing that. So yeah, it's not a bad idea. It's just hard to determine without doing a lot of research how good it would actually be,
Right.
right? Which
Exactly.
is where the data comes into play, right? Because if I were to be going into Orlando, and I had that idea, what I would be doing is, using my reports to go through all of the one bedrooms, specifically within a certain section, and trying to figure out what was allowing them to make a lot of money, right? And I would try to figure out if there was a difference between the family orientated places and the sort of like executive orientated places, right? And seeing if there was even even if they existed, right? If they didn't exist, then there's opportunity to create something that doesn't exist. But if they do exist, you're going to very clearly be able to see what the revenue difference is between those two, right? In that sort of style and like how you're promoting, because I've done a ton of research in Kissimmee, which is right outside of Orlando.
Yeah.
So I know what drives the revenue there. And like, without a doubt, you've got like Disney creates an immersive experience. You have to create an immersive experience in your home. If you do that, it allows for this like holistic experience for the family and the kids, and people are going to pay way more for that than just a house, right? But I don't know what the executives stays would look like. So anyways, that's my 2 cents on like how to figure that answer out.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, John. It seems like your data analysis, is there a lot of sort of, at least in the beginning, is it a lot of kind of manual, looking at stuff and trying to figure out how the data work? Because I mean, how do you do it?
So great question. The thing about data, right? And everyone, I feel like when everyone hears data, they're just like, that's confusing. It makes no sense. I don't understand what you mean, right? Like, and like
That'll be numbers. I don't speak that language.
I don't, right. And like, that's not the reality of data. Honestly, it's not. And so I don't have a data background, right? I did not go to school for this. I did not do any research on it. I like tried to actually study what the like true data people study, and I got lost. I was like, this makes no sense. and so I stopped it, right? Like I was taking an online class. So when I talk about data, all I'm really talking about is finding a pattern or a trend, right? So that is all that data is. It is trying to find some sort of consistent pattern that is repeatable, and then you repeat it. And if you repeat it, you're likely to get the same results, and so you have a higher likelihood of confidence in what you're about to do, right? So if I see that a bunch of 4 bedrooms in a certain area of Chicago are all making $100,000 a year, if I open a 4 bedroom in Chicago and do exactly what they're doing and maybe a little bit better, then I could probably make 100,000, right? Because there's clearly demand for it, and that's how much they're likely making. And so like that's all it is, right? And so a lot of the data providers that are out there right now, the way that they display their data doesn't allow you to easily see a pattern or a trend, right? There's no easy way to see that consistency.
Yeah.
And so the process that I teach is essentially taking all of that information and organizing it in a way that allows you to clearly see a pattern, right? And there is, without a doubt, a manual process to this. Like, you have to go through the listings and take a look at the listings, understand them, because there can be such a difference in the way that they're displayed and what's actually driving the revenue.
Yeah.
But what you end up figuring out is that, all of the homes making 100,000 in a certain area, they're all fairly large homes. They have space for a dining room. They're themed in a certain way. Their kitchens are fairly new. They have a backyard, right? And so you find all these little things, and then it creates this sort of checklist for you of, if I get all these things, I'm going to make $100,000 off this Airbnb, right? And I know my expenses are going to be 60,000, so boom, I'm in the green, right? Like,
Right,
I'm good,
right.
right?
Well, and you also can say, and this seems to be, the ones that are more popular, like this is how you can even be better, right?
Yes.
And put yours above what else people have for options in that area.
Exactly, right? So like that's that is without a doubt the biggest advantage that you would get from my work and like my process is not only are you going to know, okay, this is generally how much people are making, but it's also how do I make more than all of these people,
Yep.
right? And that's simply by looking at the top performers, right? There's like Kissimmee, like I said, I've done a ton of research in Kissimmee. There are 4 bedrooms that are making more money than 8 and 9 bedrooms in Kissimmee, right? 4 bedrooms. And it's simply 100% because of the way they design the home and photograph the home. And it's like the way they display it and the way that they price their home. And they understand Airbnb, they understand their client, they understand what's driving the revenue. They put the home together specifically for those people, and they can ask more on a nightly basis because of that, and they get a higher occupancy because the home's 10 times more desirable, right? Airbnb is all about that experience. And so with going through the data, you start to learn that, right? And the cool thing is like the people who are doing the best, they tend to all look the same, especially in certain markets, right? Like if you're in Gatlinburg in Tennessee, the certain cabin will like really do really well. And then in Florida, a certain like beach home will do really well, like theme, style, design, and all that stuff, right?
Yeah.
But the cool reality of this is that if you were to switch those homes and put the cottage on the beach, right, and the beach home in the mountains, you would never want it, right?
Yeah.
It'd be the worst thing. So that's why I say you can find the consistency, because people want a certain thing in a certain location, and so the people who design it the best in that certain area are all kind of doing it in a similar way, and all you have to do is do that similar thing, right? This is so. I know this is a long answer, but a fun little story on this is that there was this company Sonder when I first got to Chicago that was absolutely killing it, and the investors that I was working with refused to pay for an interior designer. And like I'm a 24-year-old male. I'm like, I don't know how to design anything, right? Like, I'm like, I don't know. I've never looked into this stuff a day in my life. And so what I did was I looked up their listings and I wrote out every single thing they had in the bedroom and the way that it looked and the way that it was painted. And I went to the store and bought every single last thing and did the exact same thing they did. Yeah, like recreated it. And it
Why
and it
not?
worked. Yeah, it worked. Theirs were still better, but I got it like 90% of the way there. So
Yeah, oh, that's
yeah.
great. But it's
Yeah.
funny. I was, thinking about what you were saying about different markets and what's so important. And thinking about a place that I had created. It was like a tiny house, and
Yeah.
no running water. A little composting toilet type of thing. Very, very simple and primitive. But it was rented nonstop because I allowed
Nonstop.
dogs and I allowed one night stays. I mean, I
Nice.
figured weekends maybe. Nope. That place was never empty, and it was like it made more money. That little
Yep.
tiny cottage was like, I don't know, maybe 300 square feet, maybe made
Yep.
more money than the 2-bedroom house that was on the same land.
It's the very first thing that comes to my head. Like, I would love to be able to see those listings, but like my assumption is that you created an experience with the tiny home that was probably romantic for couples to go to, that created this like different place than a regular home would, and people are willing to pay more for the experience than just a place to put to sleep, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, so like, and like that's what like I said, I think I mentioned this earlier, but like I'm getting back into owning Airbnbs. Like I want to purchase Airbnbs, and that's 100% what I'm focused on. Is like I don't want a place that is just going to be a place to sleep. I want a place that's going to create like a location where you can create a memory that lasts forever, right?
Right.
Because selfishly, I know that that's what drives revenue, right? Like not only is it a super cool place to have, but I'm going to make a ton of money, right? So like, why would I not want to go there?
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Fantastic. So John, what advice would you give to somebody who's doing exactly what you're doing? I mean, it's not, you sort of kind of already did this, but let's just say like, okay, I just want to get a place, with, like we say, within 2 hours of my house, that's going to be profitable. So what should I look for?
So, okay, so let's think exactly like obviously the closer you are, the better it's going to be. I already mentioned that, right? Sorry, the easier it's going to be. It doesn't mean it's going to be the most profitable place in the entire world, but like to get started, to get up and running, it's without a doubt going to be easier. Now, if you have zero Airbnb experience, my recommendation is maybe not to buy a place to get started, but to rent out somebody else's home and run it as an Airbnb, to get the experience. Now, go as small as you can with this, because you don't want to be spending a ton of money just to get the experience, right? Or if you know somebody who's has an Airbnb, maybe ask to like help run it or to like do work with them for free just to get the experience. Because I think it can be one of the Airbnb can be one of these things where if you have zero experience with it, it's really confusing. But as soon as you have experience with it, it's really simple,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And it becomes really easy. And so what I guess what I'm saying is like try to get that experience
Yeah. On somebody
and
else's dime.
on somebody else's dime. Yep. And exactly. And once you get that experience, then start doing the research, right? So regulation is first, understand your regulation for wherever you're going to go, and data is second, right? And data is simply just under whatever market you're going into, start to understand the data that is there and try to find the patterns and the trends to figure out what is driving the most revenue, making the most amount of money, and then create a sort of buy box where you have all this different criteria of what drives the revenue, and then go out and find the home that would cash flow for you based off of that revenue. So in other words, if you find out that a bunch of 4 bedrooms are making $100,000 a year, and you know that all of the expenses to run that 4 bedroom is going to work out to be to $60,000-$70,000 a year, then you are going to make about $30,000 off of that property, right? And if you purchase it, then you have your built-in equity and appreciation and all of those things as well, right? But like just take the time to get the experience, do the work, do the research work, and go from there. And if you need help, you can always reach out to me and I can work with you on that too.
Perfect.
And my YouTube has tons of content. Like I have 2 free courses, right? So like there's a lot of information on there about my process, about exactly how I do everything.
So John, is it John Bianchi? Is that what your YouTube channel, or do you have a
Yeah,
fancy
just
name?
first and last name, John Bianchi.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's okay.
I'm going to pronounce it my way. Okay.
Yeah, totally fine. Bianchi is the Italian way, Bianchi is the Canadian way, and so I
right. Sorry.
care either way. Yeah. But yeah, so that my name is if you type it into YouTube, you'll be able to find me. If you also type in Airbnb data or AirDNA, you're going to be able to find me as well. And if anyone actually just wants to reach out to me directly, you can reach out to the email, and I respond to every single email. It's hello@pointanalytics.co. So yeah.
Cool. So
Yeah.
John, we've covered a lot of ground, and I know we could talk longer because we both have had some similar experiences and we could have some fun, chats. But
Oh yeah.
what's one question that you wish I would have asked you that we just haven't touched on today?
I think the idea of using Airbnb in a lifestyle sort of manner, right? So like how can Airbnb be a lifestyle manner for, people who are retired essentially, right? Airbnb, when you're first getting up and running, it's a little bit tricky. You gotta learn a lot to understand. There's a lot of systems you got to figure out, but once you get that property up and running, the furniture's in there, and you've figured out how to take care of these guests really well, it is so simple and so easy to run an Airbnb. Like it really is, especially 1 or 2, right? And so, if you are retired and you're trying to look for a way that is, not going to take up a ton of extra time, not going to like hold you back on things you want to do on the weekend, like not going to hold you back on if you want to travel and still provide that extra cash flow, Airbnb is without a doubt one of like the best things that exists in the modern world to allow you to do that. And so I strongly recommend it to anybody who's looking to do that. On top of that, with that being said, I always need to mention that the vast majority of homes that exist would not make more money as an Airbnb, right? The vast majority. There's very few. You have to have the right location, the right bedroom size, the right like size of backyard. You have to have all the right features for it to actually be cash flow positive for you, right? So
compared to a long-term rental, you mean?
Compared to a long-term rental, exactly, right? And so when I give that advice, I'm not just saying go get any home and turn it into an Airbnb and you're going to put in a bunch of work and it's going to make you money.
Right.
What I'm saying is be strategic about it. And if you're strategic about it, you can find a few properties that will actually cash flow for you, and it'll supplement your income really well for minor amount of work, right? And so yeah, just do your research on it, and like you can really figure those things out fairly easily.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Excellent. John, thanks so much for being with us. I love talking to you. I never really because I'm doing these things instinctively when I'm helping somebody set up an Airbnb, or like, because my boyfriend just did his, and I'm, looking around what else is out there, what's good about them, what's bad about them, how do we want to advertise this one, because what makes it special,
Right.
and not realizing that, it's an industry, it's a thing, it's something that you could definitely do to help people. It's
Yeah.
awesome that you kind of figured it all out.
Yeah. Yeah. It worked out in a way. I kind of just that exact process you just mentioned, I just sort of turned it into like a course, right?
Yeah.
And put systems to it, and like made it easy for new people who didn't know anything about this to leap like way ahead of me, right?
Yeah.
And the years that it took to figure that out. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, and that's it, right? They say, turn your mess into a message, or take something you wish,
Yes.
or you're teaching yourself of 5 years ago, right? Or
Yes.
however
Yeah.
many, right? Well, exactly
Exactly.
5 years in your case, right? If I'd
Yeah.
known this 5 years ago, boy, could I have saved some time and money.
Yeah. Exactly. That's exactly
Awesome.
it. Big
Smart,
time.
smart. Excellent.
Mhm.
So great meeting you.
Great meeting you too. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. And thank you, listener, for listening. I know that, you're thinking all of a sudden now your wheels are turning. You're like, hey, man, I could rent an apartment next door and I could put it on Airbnb, but I really need John's help. So make sure you check him out. His YouTube is John Bianchi, John Bianchi.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll pronounce it your way. John Bianchi, spelled Bianchi. No, sorry. I'm just kidding. Um, and and also share this episode with somebody who has been thinking about starting up an Airbnb, or maybe a little bit intimidated, maybe a little bit not sure what to do. I think John could really be a great benefit, and certainly just listening to this podcast will definitely help them out. And be sure to be here next week when we'll have somebody else cool for you to learn from. Have a good week.